Hi, I'm Lenora, and this is the part I never thought I'd say out loud. Last month, in front of the entire family during a celebration for me, my parents stood up and announced a trip to New York. Everyone clapped, smiled, cheered. So, I asked one simple question. What time are we leaving? And my father looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not coming. You're not part of this family. You stay here and watch the kids." I laughed at first. I thought it was a joke, but no one else did. And what I said next shattered everything. But before I take you into that room with me, tell me, where are you listening from? And has your family ever made you feel invisible? Drop a comment below. Because this story, it's not just mine. It might be yours too. The community hall always smelled faintly of lemon polish and burnt coffee, like every gathering meant to look welcoming, but never quite felt personal. I arrived early, as usual, smoothing the crease of my jacket and scanning the rows of folding chairs laid out in careful lines. My parents liked order. They liked things that looked right from a distance. This evening was framed as a recognition ceremony. Family, legacy, contribution. Words like that floated easily through the printed program. Neighbors, cousins, a few church friends filled the room with polite chatter. From the outside, it looked warm. From the inside, it felt rehearsed. I took a seat near the aisle, close enough to be useful if something needed doing. I always ended up there, not front row, not hidden either, just available. Over the years, I'd learned that was my place. The one who helps, who arranges, who fills in the gaps so everything runs smoothly. My parents sat up front, composed, familiar in their authority. My mother adjusted her scarf. My father tapped the microphone, testing it once. Applause followed, brief and automatic. I joined in, clapping at the right moments, watching the way people leaned forward when my parents spoke. Pride carries a certain posture. They wore it well. Halfway through the program, after a short speech about family values and shared effort, my father paused. He glanced at my mother, then back at the room. "We have another announcement," he said, voice steady. "Next week, the whole family will be flying to New York for an important event." The reaction was instant. Smiles, murmurs. Someone let out a soft laugh of excitement. I felt it too, a small, unexpected lift in my chest. New York. All of us. For a second, I let myself imagine it. Moving through a crowded terminal together, coffee and paper cups, the city rising around us. Without thinking, my fingers brushed the silver bracelet at my wrist. Elowen had given it to me years ago. A quiet gift on a quiet afternoon. I didn't comment. I didn't want to draw attention to the hope creeping in. The program paused, as if waiting for the applause to fade. In that brief opening, I asked what seemed like the most ordinary question. "What time is the departure?" The silence that followed was sharp, not long, but heavy enough to notice. Conversations stalled. My father looked at me, expression settling into something firm and distant. "You don't need to know," he said. "You're not part of this trip." A beat passed. My mother didn't look at me. She kept her gaze on the program in her lap. "You'll stay behind," my father added, already moving on. "Someone has to take care of all the kids." That was it. No explanation, no softening of the words, just an instruction, delivered cleanly. I felt the room shift around me. Chairs creaked. A laugh rose somewhere too loud, too quick. People turned their faces away with the efficiency of those who don't want to be involved. The program resumed. The air filled again with polite noise. Standing there, I understood something with unsettling clarity. This hadn't been a slip. It wasn't spontaneous. The decision had been made long before I arrived, long before I took my seat near the aisle. Across the room, Elowen met my eyes for a brief moment. There was no rescue in her look, only recognition. She saw it. She saw me. And then it was gone. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. Silence in that moment wasn't surrender. It was calculation. I stayed where they put me, listening to every word that followed, noting every glance and pause. By the time the applause ended, I had already decided something important. I wasn't going to miss a single detail from here on out. I stayed on my feet after the applause faded, mostly because sitting would have meant thinking too much. The chairs scraped the floor as people stood, conversations rising again like nothing had happened. I reached for a stack of programs on the nearest table and began straightening them, aligning the corners, giving my hands something to do. Someone brushed past me and said, "Such a nice evening," as if I were part of the welcome committee. Another voice floated by, already making plans for New York, hotels, a show, a dinner reservation that sounded hard to get. No one looked at me when they said it. They didn't have to. I carried the programs to the back, then returned to fold tablecloths. It was muscle memory. When you're useful long enough, your body moves before your mind catches up. I noticed how easily the room emptied. People hugged my parents, congratulated them, promised to call. A few children darted between chairs, restless and loud, their parents laughing as they gathered coats. As I wiped down a table, my cousin leaned in with a quick smile. "Thanks again for taking the kids next week," she said, already turning away. "Such a relief to know they'll be with you." I didn't answer right away. The words landed oddly, like a message meant for someone else that had found me by mistake. Taking the kids, next week. It wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. She was gone before I could respond, pulled into another conversation. I stood there with the cloth in my hand, watching the doorway where people kept exiting, each goodbye another small closing door. The plan had moved faster than any conversation I'd been part of. Faster than consent. By the time my parents suggested we head back to their place to finish up, the sky outside had dimmed. The drive was quiet. Streetlights slid across the windshield in steady intervals. I watched them pass, one after another, counting without meaning to. Their kitchen was bright and familiar, the kind of room designed for efficiency. I set my bag down and reached for a glass, filling it with water from the tap. On the counter, beside a bowl of fruit, sat a neat stack of papers. I didn't go looking for them. They were just there. At the top of the page was a schedule, dates in bold, names listed underneath. Drop-off times, pickup notes, emergency numbers, practical, thorough. My name sat at the top, centered, as if it belonged there. There was no signature line, no question mark, no space left blank. I stared at it longer than I meant to. This wasn't an idea. It was a plan. Printed, organized, ready. My mother noticed where I was looking and smiled. "We wrote everything out so it would be easy," she said. "You're so good at keeping track of details." My father added, "We figured this would be best. You're flexible, reliable." The words sounded like compliments. They always did. Phrases like that had followed me for years. Reliable, flexible, good at this. Each one wrapped the same message in softer paper. "It's only a week," my mother continued, reaching for a towel. "And you're home anyway." Home anyway, as if that explained everything. I folded the paper once, then unfolded it, careful not to crease it. "I thought the New York trip included everyone," I said, keeping my voice even. I chose each word slowly, like stepping stones. My father didn't answer that. He pointed instead to a time on the list. "We'll need you here by 7 that Monday," he said. "The youngest gets fussy if breakfast is late." The conversation slid away from my question as if it had never been asked. Logistics replaced meaning, meals, bedtimes, who needed what and when. I listened, nodding where expected, noting how smoothly the subject shifted back to what I was meant to manage. Elowen passed through the kitchen on her way out, coat already on. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed my hand once, a brief pressure, then let go. The silver bracelet caught the light as she did. For a moment, it steadied me. When the house finally quieted, I took the papers with me. I laid them flat on the table and read every line again. This wasn't a favor. It wasn't help. It was an assignment, handed down and confirmed by everyone else's assumptions. That night, I opened my laptop and began saving everything. Messages, emails, screenshots of schedules and reminders. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Because accidents don't come with printed plans. When I finally turned off the car and stepped into my apartment, the silence inside hit different. Not peaceful, not restful. Just loud. The kind of quiet that makes you hear everything you didn't say hours earlier. I didn't bother with the lights. The street lamp outside threw a dull glow through the blinds, painting long shadows across the kitchen table. I dropped my keys in the dish, shrugged off my coat, and stood there for a moment, not really sure what to do next. The air smelled like lavender from the fabric softener I used last week, which felt so far away now, like it belonged to someone else. I slipped the bracelet off my wrist, the one Elowen gave me. I laid it on the counter, stepped back, looked at it, then picked it up and slid it right back on. Not because I meant to, just because that's what I always did. Some things are so built into you, you stop noticing them until they start to feel like chains. I made tea just for the warmth of holding the cup, sat at the table and opened my laptop. The screen lit up my face like a spotlight. I didn't scroll through social media. I didn't check the news. I went straight to my inbox. It started with the most recent email. My father forwarding me a revised care schedule. No greeting, just bullet points and bolded dates. I saved it to a folder I just created, Family Logistics. Then I started going backward. I searched for any message with the word help in it. Dozens popped up. At first, the language had been soft. Could you help with, or would you mind taking over? But as I moved through the months, then years, the phrasing changed. You'll be on food. You're in charge of setup. As usual, we'll count on you. No questions, no requests, just assumptions dressed up as planning. The shift had happened so gradually, I'd missed it while it was happening. Like standing in the ocean and not noticing the tide pulling you out. I opened another thread, texts from last Thanksgiving. My sister had asked if I could host again since you have more space, even though she knew I had to borrow folding chairs from a neighbor just to fit everyone. The year before that, it was my brother's wife sending over a grocery list, not a suggestion, an actual list, saying, "It just makes more sense if you do the shopping since you know what the kids eat." Every message was so casual, so confident in its expectation, I hadn't even realized the weight of it until I saw them stacked together on my screen. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I thought about birthdays I planned but wasn't in any photos for. The Christmas when everyone gave each other gifts, and I got a thank you card for orchestrating everything. The baby shower I hosted in my own apartment, where no one bothered to ask if I had enough seating. None of it was dramatic. There were no shouting matches or slammed doors. Just 1,000 small assumptions that added up to something much harder to name. I opened my calendar out of habit. That's when I saw it. An event had popped up, forwarded from my mother's account. The subject line was simple: family trip. Attached was a spreadsheet. Travel dates, hotel blocks, car rentals, group dinner reservations. There were notes about theater tickets and a museum tour. My name appeared only once. Childcare coverage confirmed, Lenora. I sat still, hand on the mouse, not moving. It was all decided, before the announcement, before the applause, before I even knew there was a trip. I was never meant to be included. I was a part of the structure, not the story. I closed the calendar and opened a blank message. I started typing something simple. "I'll take the kids for the week. Just let me know drop-off times." I read it twice, then 3 times. My finger hovered over the send button, and then I deleted the whole thing. I didn't owe anyone an automatic yes, not this time, not again. Instead, I renamed my folder. Documentation. I started adding screenshots, texts, emails, photos, anything that hinted at the pattern. I wasn't gathering evidence for revenge. I was gathering it so I could see the shape of the thing I'd been living inside. If I was invisible to them, I could at least use that to observe, to learn, to stop reacting and start choosing. That choice alone felt like drawing a line in wet cement. I didn't respond to the latest message. I didn't explain why. I turned off notifications and went to bed, my laptop still open on the kitchen table. By morning, I knew this wasn't about New York. It was about who they believed I was. 2 days passed. I kept my phone on, but not near me. I let the messages come and I let them sit. I didn't respond. I cooked, cleaned, worked. I went about my life as if nothing had shifted, when inside, everything had. Mid-morning on the second day, a text from my mother popped up. "We should talk. Maybe come by this afternoon, just to clear the air." Clear the air. That phrasing was her favorite whenever someone in the family said something out loud they weren't supposed to. It always meant one thing: contain it before it spreads. I stared at the message for a while. I didn't write back. I simply showed up at 3 p.m., as they no doubt expected I would. The house looked the same. White shutters, hedges trimmed too neatly, wind chimes that never stopped even when there was no breeze. I parked across the street like I had when I was in high school, before I was allowed to drive their car. Some habits never die, some weren't meant to. When I stepped inside, the air had that cinnamon cleaner smell they used for company. Not strong, but just enough to say, "We care what you think," or at least want to appear like we do. They were already in the kitchen, sitting at the long table. My father had his tablet out, pretending to read the news. My mother was pouring iced tea into glasses she reserved for holidays, the kind with etched leaves no one could ever grip right. "Lenora," she said warmly, overly so, "we're glad you came." I gave a short nod, sat down at the far end, opposite them. "We just wanted to talk," Dad began, putting the tablet aside, folding his hands like he was mediating a work dispute. "There's clearly been some confusion." "About what exactly?" I asked evenly. Mom smiled in that way people do when they're about to hand you something heavy, but pretend it's light. "Well, everything. The trip. Your role. We never meant to make you feel excluded. Goodness, you know how much we love you." "And value you," Dad added. "Always have," she nodded. "You're our rock, Lenora. Always dependable. Always there. You're the glue that holds everything together." There it was, the soft music before the cell. "We thought," Dad continued, "maybe this has all just been a misunderstanding. Maybe you took it differently than we intended." I said nothing. I watched their faces. Neither of them looked uncomfortable. They looked prepared. Mom reached for one of the glasses and pushed it gently toward me. "You know how much your siblings rely on you. And with you being so good with the kids, so flexible with your schedule, it just made sense." I looked at the condensation running down the glass. "You're not married," Dad offered, like it was a compliment. "No ties to hold you back right now. That freedom is a gift to the family." A gift. My lack of children, my apartment living, my life that didn't follow their template, it had all become their convenience. "You've always been so good at adjusting," Mom said, like she was tying a bow on the box. "We just assumed you wouldn't mind." I could feel the corners of the room tightening. The air didn't move, even with the ceiling fan turning slow above us. Then my father leaned in just a little and said, "Of course, this doesn't need to become a whole thing. Let's not drag this into something uncomfortable. It's just a week, Lenora. We wouldn't want the family to feel tension." There it was, a warning wrapped in kindness. "Right," Mom added quickly. "It's not worth stirring anything up. You know how some people can exaggerate or misunderstand your tone." Tone. That word had been used on me for decades. Don't raise your tone. Watch your tone. Careful with your tone. They never told me not to speak. They just taught me how not to be heard. And yet, I didn't feel panicked, not like before. There was something steadier under my skin now, something that made me sit still and hear them out to the very end. I was watching them, watching how the words were chosen, how they built a narrative that erased mine before I'd even spoken. This wasn't about clearing the air. It was about writing the script and casting me in it, again. I took a breath. "I'll think about it," I said calmly. Both their faces flickered just slightly. They were expecting compliance, not consideration. "Of course," Mom said quickly. "Take your time, no pressure." But the pressure was already there, thick in the walls, baked into the family's rhythm. I stood to leave. As I reached the hallway, I caught sight of Elowen standing near the stairs. She wasn't part of the meeting, but she had been close enough to hear everything. She didn't speak. She just looked at me with a kind of softness I hadn't seen in anyone else in that house in a long time. We held that look for only a second, but it was enough. Outside, the late sun was sinking, casting long shadows across the driveway. I didn't look back. I got in my car, sat for a moment with the windows rolled down. The breeze carried that same cinnamon-clean smell as it did when I walked in, but now it felt sour, false. As I drove away, I didn't feel like I'd won anything, but I hadn't given in either. That mattered more. Because now I knew, the moment I stayed silent again, the role would become permanent. And I wasn't going to be written into someone else's story like that again. They thought the conversation had ended. I knew it had only begun. The next morning, the machine kicked in. Quiet at first, but steady, like the hum of a refrigerator you only notice when it stops. By noon, a group text thread buzzed to life. My brother asked if his kids could sleep with their cousins to make things easier on Lenora. My sister chimed in, "Don't forget Jordan's meds. They're on the top shelf next to the blender." Someone else listed bedtime routines, food allergies, pickup times. All of it flowed around me like I'd already said yes. At no point did anyone ask if I was okay with any of this. By the time I arrived at my parents' house that afternoon, there were labeled duffel bags lined up by the front door, 2 booster seats in the hallway, and a whiteboard on the fridge that read, "This week's schedule." My name was at the center in red marker. No one even blinked when I walked in. Mom was packing sandwiches for the kids, acting like this had all been agreed upon weeks ago. "There's an extra key under the mat if you need to come early," she said, without looking up. I stood there for a beat, unsure if she was talking to me or just stating facts for the air. "That's fine," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. For the next 2 days, I became a full-time scheduler, cook, referee, chauffeur, problem solver, lunchboxes, allergy-safe snacks, field trip forms, soccer cleats. I missed 2 work deadlines and postponed a dentist appointment. I canceled a coffee with someone I'd been meaning to reconnect with for months. All of it was framed as temporary, just until the week passed. But by Thursday, I'd already forgotten what day it was. At some point, while I was cutting up grapes and wiping down the counter for the 5th time that afternoon, my brother slid a paper across the island. "It's just in case," he said. "Emergency contact stuff. You know how schools are." I picked it up. At the top, temporary guardian authorization. My name, all their kids' names, blank lines for signatures. We figured it'd be easier for everyone if the paperwork was already done, he added. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. That phrase had become their favorite way of saying, don't resist. I didn't answer. I walked the paper over to the fridge and stuck it there with a magnet. I didn't touch it again that day. By evening, the kids were loud and wired from juice boxes and Disney Plus. My mom handed me a stack of envelopes, travel itineraries just in case someone needed to reach them. She smiled. We trust you with everything, you know that. I wanted to ask, is that love or just habit? That night, once the kids had gone down, I sat alone at my apartment. I hadn't even unpacked my own bag. I stared at that folded paper and thought, for a brief second, maybe I should just sign it. Get through the week. Have some peace. Let it go. I imagined the house quiet again. No noise, no mess. Just me, a book, a blanket. But something about the thought made me feel smaller. Like I'd be giving away something I hadn't even gotten the chance to keep. My phone buzzed. Allowin'. No small talk, no updates. Just one sentence. You know you don't have to. That's all she said. I looked down at the bracelet still on my wrist. It felt heavier than usual, but also grounded. I texted her back. I know. The next morning, I returned to the house. The same schedule was still on the fridge, the same bags, the same air that smelled like lemon cleaner and old decisions. Mom handed me a pen. Just need your John Hancock, she said cheerfully. I looked at her, then at the paper, then at the pen. I need more time, I said. Calm, flat, no drama. Her smile flickered just slightly before returning. Of course, no pressure. But there was pressure. It sat in the room like another person. My father walked in and clapped a hand on my shoulder like we were teammates. We know you'll do the right thing. I didn't answer. I walked into the other room and poured myself some water. No one followed. That evening, I drove the kids home, helped them settle, checked that they brushed their teeth. I didn't rush, I didn't stall, and I didn't sign. I wasn't ready to make a declaration, but I wasn't going to give quiet approval anymore either. As I walked back to my apartment, the sun already down, I thought, if I stay silent, they'll keep calling it love. But I knew better now, and I was preparing for something else entirely. The house was already awake when I arrived. Not loud, just the particular kind of noise families make when something big is about to happen. The coffee machine hissed in the corner, suitcases lined the hallway like soldiers. Dad stood in the kitchen with his phone in one hand, stirring cream into his coffee with the other, even though he never actually drank it when he was nervous. Mom moved in and out of rooms, checking zippers, counting sweaters. No one looked surprised to see me walk in. They assumed I'd show up early to help. That assumption had been baked into every plan they made. But I hadn't come to load bags or checklists. I'd picked this moment for a reason, right before the engine turned, before inertia could take over. If I was going to say it, it had to be now. The children were already dressed, eating cereal off paper towels at the dining table. They looked up at me and smiled, expecting I'd soon be taking them outside. Like always, I gave them a quiet nod but didn't sit down. Dad glanced at me. Good, you're here. We were just figuring out car seats. Mom added without looking up. The van's ready. We'll leave it with you. Keys on the hook. I stood still in the center of the kitchen. I won't be doing that, I said, simply. No build-up, no apology. Just the words I needed to say. The sound of cereal being chewed was suddenly the loudest thing in the room. Dad blinked, like maybe he hadn't heard right. What's that? I can't take the kids this week, I repeated more firmly. I won't be staying here while you're gone. A full second passed, then 2. The silence was almost impressive in its depth. You're doing this now? Mom asked. She didn't raise her voice. She just stopped moving. Dad set down his cup too hard, and a small line of coffee spilled onto the counter. "You've known about this for days." "I was never asked," I said, not unkindly. "I was assigned." Mom crossed her arms. "You knew what we needed," Dad added. "You didn't say no before. I'm saying it now." That was when the tone changed. "You're putting us in a terrible spot," Mom said, voice thinning. "What are we supposed to do? We're flying out in 3 hours." "Everyone's counting on you," Dad added sharply. "This isn't just about us. Your siblings are depending on this too." And just like that, the weight of it shifted, from request to guilt, from family to responsibility, from assumption to demand. My sister poked her head in from the hallway. "Wait, you're not taking them? Are you serious?" One of the kids called out, "But Auntie, you said—" I closed my eyes for half a second, not long, but enough to breathe. "No, I didn't say I would." Dad leaned back against the fridge. "After everything we've done for you?" "I'm not trying to punish anyone," I said, "but I'm not available." Mom's voice dropped low, the way it does when she wants something to sound more serious than shouting. "You know what this looks like, right? People will ask why you didn't help. What do you want us to tell them?" And there it was, the final lever. Shame. "Tell them the truth," I wanted to say. "Tell them you never asked." But instead, I said nothing. Silence, when you choose it, can be louder than words. Dad made a sound between a scoff and a sigh. "Unbelievable." "Then we'll handle it," Mom said, turning away, already adjusting. "We always do." It wasn't a compliment. It was punishment. The kind that doesn't slam doors. It just stops opening them. I stepped back toward the hallway. They didn't stop me. They didn't follow. From the living room, I heard the kids asking who was going to pick them up from school now. Someone answered, "We'll figure it out," in a voice meant to be overheard. No one looked at me as I left. Outside, the sun had barely cleared the trees. The street smelled like early morning grass and distant coffee. My car was still where I parked it, windows fogged from the inside. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there, hands on the wheel, breath even. It didn't feel like a victory, but it didn't feel like defeat either. It felt like the beginning of something harder. I knew, without needing to check, that the calls would start by lunchtime. The slow burn of retaliation doesn't wait for anyone. But for now, I had one clear thing. I'd said no. Not out of anger, not out of spite, because I'd finally understood what that word protected. As I pulled into the grocery store parking lot, my phone buzzed twice in quick succession. I hadn't been gone more than 2 hours. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't said a word to anyone outside that house. And still, it had started. The first message came from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. "Hey, I just heard you backed out last minute. Hope you're okay?" It didn't ask what happened. It told me. I sat there in my car, keys still in the ignition, engine humming, thumb hovering over the screen. The words were soft, almost kind. But I could already hear their echo, passed from person to person, reshaped just enough to feel harmless. The language was polished, practiced. 2 more texts came in before I reached the produce aisle. "You must be so overwhelmed lately. I told Mom you've been under a lot of pressure." And then, "It's okay to say no sometimes. But maybe not the day of, right?" They weren't random. The wording, the timing, none of it was accidental. It was the family's favorite method of rewriting a scene, not with confrontation, but with concern. By the time I was grabbing lemons, my uncle had messaged, "Just heard you're taking some space. Everyone's worried about you. Let us know what you need." They were painting me in gentle tones, frazzled, delicate, overwhelmed. And through that softness, they made me unreliable. I stood there next to a woman debating avocado ripeness and felt something cold and sharp settle beneath my ribs. I hadn't even made it to lunch, and the framing was already in motion. Walking back to my car, the next blow hit harder. It was a screenshot, sent to me by a friend from college who was still looped into the larger family thread for holiday invitations. A cropped image of a message I'd sent days earlier. Just let me know what's needed and I'll do what I can. Hurry, except the rest of that message, the part where I clarified I couldn't stay overnight, that I had commitments that weekend, was missing. I knew the tactic: trim a sentence, strip the context, hold it up as proof. They hadn't even doctored it. They just removed the parts that made it clear. My fingers started to type, hovering over the reply. I wanted to send the full screenshot. I wanted to line up timestamps, show the gaps, lay it out piece by piece like a courtroom closing argument. Instead, I deleted the draft. Because I remembered what Elowen once told me when I was crying in her kitchen over another family holiday gone sideways. If you argue their story, you're still playing their game. I didn't need to win the group thread. I needed something bigger than that. I drove home, not out of defeat, but to pause, to think. 10 minutes after I walked through the front door, Elowen called. I saw the messages, she said, without asking how I was. Her voice was steady, familiar. I didn't say anything at first. They want a reaction, she said, because that's how they shift focus. I know. Then don't give them one. Don't chase the noise. End the story. Don't argue it. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. My hand brushed the bracelet on my wrist, still cool, still firm. I sat down on the edge of the couch and finally breathed. That was the moment the shift began. Not loud, not dramatic, but it was real. I decided not to respond, not to explain, not to correct, not to clarify. Instead, I opened a new document. I copied every screenshot I'd saved. Messages, dates, edited texts, side-by-sides. I created a folder marked Discrepancy. It wasn't about revenge, it was about readiness. If they wanted to turn the truth into a whisper campaign, I would wait for the one moment, the right room, the right witness, where I could show the full picture. I didn't need to convince everyone, just the ones who mattered. The texts kept coming that afternoon. A few more relatives weighed in, each message more pointed than the last. Hope this isn't about something petty. Family means sometimes doing hard things, even if they don't feel fair. You always were sensitive, Lenora. That's not a weakness, but don't let it isolate you. It wasn't even subtle anymore, but I didn't reply. Instead, I fixed myself a sandwich I barely tasted, sat at my desk, and refined the timeline. I watched the group thread light up. I watched my name get molded and shaped, turned into someone easier to dismiss. But I stayed still, because now I wasn't trying to survive their version of me. I was preparing to end it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had dipped just enough to cast long shadows across the yard, stretching toward the porch like fingers trying to pull me back. I sat in the car a moment longer, watching the movement through the window, bags being zipped, children shuffled, laughter that sounded just a little too practiced. I didn't need to check the time. Everything had been timed to the minute. I stepped out of the car, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the house. No big entrance, no announcement. Just me, with a folder in my hand and a single sentence rehearsed so many times it had become muscle memory. Inside, it was the usual swirl before a family trip. Lists shouted over one another, someone asking where the car seats had gone, a niece tugging on her mother's arm. My mother was double-checking medication packs, and my brother was lecturing one of the twins about screen time. They barely looked up when I came in, almost as if they'd expected I would show, or hoped I wouldn't. I stood still for a second, just enough to take inventory, not of the chaos, but of the audience. My Uncle Paul was there, sipping something dark from a thermal mug. Aunt June hovered near the door, phone in hand. They weren't part of the mess, but they were definitely watching it. Witnesses, whether they realized it or not. I made my way through the hallway slowly, each step unhurried. The air had that tightness you feel right before a storm, not loud, but heavy, charged. Just as I crossed into the dining room, my mother turned. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, too brightly. "We'll talk after, okay?" I didn't sit. "Now works." A beat passed. My father stood from the table, face unreadable, and my sister-in-law shifted uncomfortably. From behind the kitchen counter, my brother walked forward, holding his phone like it was Exhibit A. "Before you start," he said, "can we clear something up?" He tapped the screen and turned it to face me. A screenshot. A cropped version of a message I'd sent days ago about helping however I can, as always. No date, no context, just the words they needed. He waited. Everyone did. The room didn't fall silent exactly. It leaned, silent, pressing toward me like a held breath. I didn't flinch. "I'm not here to argue," I said. My voice was steady, maybe too steady. "And I'm not here to be explained." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Printed pages, time-stamped emails, full message threads. One copy for the table, another for anyone who asked later. I laid it down gently. No drama, just gravity. And then, I reached for my bracelet, the silver one Elowen gave me. I slid it off and set it beside the folder. "I'm not available," I said evenly. That's it. No speech, no elaboration, just those 4 words. Silence followed, but not the kind they usually wielded. This one didn't crush, it cleared. My father opened his mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it. My mother glanced at the folder, but didn't touch it. My sister-in-law blinked rapidly, then turned away, pretending to check on the kids. Even my brother, Mr. Confident, looked like he wasn't sure what play came next. Aunt June broke the silence with a cough, but said nothing. Uncle Paul was still holding that mug, but now his eyes were on me. I didn't look back. They could keep spinning. They could draft 100 new versions of the story if they wanted. But the paper was there. The timeline was there. The receipts were, as the kids say, undeniable. And more importantly, I had made no noise, no fuss. Just the truth, placed plainly. And that made it harder for them to twist, because they couldn't twist what wasn't moving. There was a kind of unraveling in that room, quiet but irreversible. The lines they had drawn for years, the ones that told them who I was and what I would tolerate, had been snapped in two. And they didn't have the tools to draw new ones fast enough. Nobody stopped me when I turned to leave. No slammed doors, no dramatic exit. Just steps, mine, and the sound of Elowen falling in beside me as I reached the porch. She didn't say a word, and I didn't need her to. I didn't even glance back as we walked down the front path. There was nothing back there I needed anymore, just a house full of people rewriting a play I'd finally walked out of. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole. Not because they accepted me, but because I no longer needed them to. I didn't know what they'd say next, but I knew my part was finished. The day after I walked out of my parents' house, my phone stayed quiet. No messages, no missed calls, just silence. The kind that isn't peaceful at first, but startling. I'd grown so used to waiting for the next demand, the next accusation wrapped in concern, the next guilt-laced reminder. Without it, the quiet felt hollow, but not empty, more like space. Space I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I kept checking my phone anyway, muscle memory maybe, or just the absurd hope that someone might reach out, not to pull me back, but to say they understood. Nothing came. And after a while, I stopped checking. Elowen didn't ask how I was feeling. She just made tea, put on music, and sat nearby, her presence calm, anchoring. That evening, we watched the sunset from my tiny balcony. We didn't say much. I think she knew that words weren't what I needed. The New York trip happened anyway. I saw glimpses online, photos of the kids at the museum, a group shot at the hotel. My sister-in-law posted something vague about managing more than expected with a prayer hands emoji. No one tagged me, no one mentioned the shift. But I knew the scramble had been real. A cousin texted a week later, just checking in, heard there was some misunderstanding. That was the word they'd settled on, misunderstanding. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing to correct. I hadn't been misunderstood, I'd been rewritten, and I'd finally set down the pen. At first, the quiet felt like loss. Then it began to feel like relief. A few Sundays later, Elowen and I took a walk through the neighborhood farmer's market. The air was crisp, not cold. She bought apples, I bought too much honey. We sat on a bench afterward, sipping cider from paper cups, watching a little girl twirl in a circle until she got dizzy and collapsed in giggles. Her mom laughed too, scooping her up with a gentleness I recognized. That moment didn't change everything, but it reminded me of what enough felt like: safe, small, true. There were no grand apologies, no confessions. The house I'd grown up in continued on, holiday plans made without me, group chats active in corners I'd muted. Occasionally someone would forward me a family update, often with a little comment, "Thought you'd want to know," or "No pressure, just sharing." I never responded with anger, just distance. I didn't need them to be sorry. I just needed them not to edit me anymore. One evening, I hosted a small dinner. Just Elowen, a few friends, people who'd never asked me to shrink. I set the table with mismatched dishes, let candles burn low, and played the jazz station that always made my apartment feel warmer. Before everyone arrived, I went to my drawer and pulled out the silver bracelet. I hadn't worn it since that day. This time, I put it on without hesitation. It didn't feel like armor anymore. It felt like a reminder, not of pain, but of choice, of boundary, of self. After dessert, someone asked how my week had been. I said, "Lighter," and I meant it. I don't know what my family says now. Maybe I'm still the problem in their version, the one who abandoned, who refused. Maybe I'll always be that to them. But I've learned that I don't have to answer to the story they wrote. I don't even have to correct it. The truth doesn't need an audience to exist. There are days I miss them, moments really. The way my father always whistled when he mowed the lawn. The way my niece would crawl into my lap without asking. But I also know that memory is not the same as permission. I can hold love for who they were to me, and still walk away from who they expect me to be. Forgiveness, if it comes, won't be loud, and it won't be a reunion. It'll be in small things, letting go of the need to be right or seen or claimed. I didn't leave my family. I left the role they wrote for me.